Bonjour, bienvenue à l'Église de Detroit. Mon nom à l'église. Mon nom est Jared et mon effectuera le service aujourd'hui. Merci.
That is not.
That's about as hillbilly as it gets. How do you say hillbilly in French?
I gotta switch here.
He said he'll never get French is pronounced Ben Mine.
Buenos dias, Edgar. Bienvenidos a la Iglesia de Detroit. Mi nombre es Jared y yo llevaré a cabo el servicio de hoy. One more. This one's for my kids. They've been learning this. Udge orning me. Elkamwe ote fa etroit de urch che. Ime omne isye erije. Anye ie ilwe eBay unducting k. Fa ervise iste orning me. Good morning. That was Pig Latin. That was Pig Latin. Okay. Which being interpreted is, good morning, welcome to the Detroit Church. My name is Jared, and I'll be conducting the service this morning.
Of course, we're walking through Daniel's prayer, and we want to come back to that since we took a break from it last week with my German friends here. But before I get into that, I just wanted to say that I'd like to first of all express my appreciation to all of you for patiently enduring last Sunday the fact that you only understood half the sermon, most of you. Jean-Guy sat in the back so Manfred and Helga could sit here, and he said, I'm not going to do that anymore. I only understood half the sermon. So that was pretty cool. I would imagine that some of you sit there and wonder, how does he do that? And you know, I wonder the same thing. It was my major study in college. I still have my first book, and I remember my first phrases. I can show you the first phrases that I learned in the German language, and to now have been able to stand up and preach the gospel in German, I've come a long way, baby. And it's been a lot of hard work and studying and reading and appearing in dictionaries countless times, trial and error, and speaking German every opportunity I can. I've learned to recognize the accent, and if I'm out in a public place and I hear a German accent, I will immediately begin. I'll say, you're German, and start talking. And having Manfred and Helga has helped tremendously. One of the things that is essential to learning a language is finding a native speaker, because there's so many things you're not going to get out of a textbook and a dictionary that you'll get from a native speaker. And they become a walking, living, breathing dictionary for you. And that's what Manfred and Helga are for me. And it amazes me. Like I say, sometimes I look back and I think, how did I do that? Because last Sunday was different. One time before I tried an outline extempore, and I didn't do nearly so well with it that time as I did this time, though I managed. But in every other time that I've done that here, I've always written a sermon and read it. And this time I just had an outline, and much of what you heard last Sunday was just like what you're hearing now. It was extemporaneously uttered without having it written in front of me. And I've listened to parts of it, and I was aware of it at the time I was doing it. I made some mistakes, grammatical errors, and so forth. But Manfred And I'm always chiding myself for that, and I think one of the signs that I do know the language and have the command of it is the fact that I recognize when I make a mistake and I correct it. But Monford tells me I'm too modest. He says I do far better than I think I do. And he said, Ben, he said, the Germans don't use the correct grammar. They don't speak it correctly. And you know that's true. We don't our own language. And there will be occasions I caught myself at one point stumbling around trying to find the words to express my thoughts, and I finally did that. But then I realized I do that same thing in English. So, you know, you do it in German. Now, granted, it is for me a second language, and I don't have the ready command of it that I do my own, which means that I have to do a lot more brain sweat to pull the grammar and the expressions and the words together to get my thoughts out. And it is a very exhausting experience. And Caitlin and Sarah, you know what I'm talking about because you studied French and you've been in situations where you've had to speak French and you know how exhausting that can be after a while. Jennifer came over, and I taught Jennifer as a child to speak German, and she does rather well. And she said at the end of that visit, she was completely given out, just exhausted. So last Sunday I was, But it amazes me. At one point I was sitting at the table, and I was talking to Helga, and we're just having a conversation, and she's just talking to me like I'm talking to you right now. And I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking, I understand her. And I don't have to translate it into English. Everything she's saying to me right now is so clear, so plain, just as if she was speaking to me in English. And I can hardly believe that. I remember Linda and I going to Quebec for the first time, and we stopped. We were trying to find a hotel in Montreal, and we stopped in a flower shop to get information, and the lady couldn't speak English. And she proceeded to help me out in finding a location, and I was standing there, and I thought, I understand what she's saying. We're communicating. Is this real? I can't believe this. For me, it's just you'd have to do what I've done to know what I'm talking about, but it's such an exciting experience to cross that barrier. But it's so plain to me that it seems like it should be plain to anybody else listening. But yet I know for many people it's just blah, 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 blah. But that's the wonder of being able to cross the language barrier. And there was another thing that occurred to me after their visit. And that is that God, and I believe that this is a gift God has given me to be able to do this. And not that you don't have to work at it, because trust me, it's a lot of work. But it's work I enjoy. It's fun. So I'm willing to do that to acquire the skill. But it occurred to me that in my relationship with them and in all the years of speaking German, I have experienced and expressed through that language the full range of human emotion. I have expressed sorrow. We were crying when we parted on Tuesday. I have expressed sorrow. I hugged Helga. I was crying. Ich liebe mein Mutti Helgachen. Through the tears, I love my little mother Helga. And that's what I call her, Mutti Helgachen, which means little mama Helga. And I've experienced anger. We've had quarrels. I've experienced anger. I know how to cuss in German. Don't ask me whether I have or not, but I know how to do it. I have experienced joy, exuberance, and at times downright giddiness. Just Monday night, we were laughing hysterically. He bought some postcards. And he wanted me to buy some stamps for these postcards. And I went in the post office, and I'm thinking, who all does he know in America to send postcards to? And I bought American stamps for American postage. And he said, Ben, I want to send these to Germany. Well, I was wondering who you were going to send them to. So we got going on that, and we played that theme, and we were hysterical. So it's just interesting to be able to have come far enough to have experienced the whole range of human emotions expressed through another language. That's an exciting experience. And I thank you for tolerating that, and that I could do that, because otherwise they would have gone out of here and not understood what I had said. And it will accomplish the purpose whereunto it was sent, no matter whether it changes their lives or not. It will, and I do it in that confidence. So that's enough of that. Let's get to the message today. There was a point in my outline last Sunday or 2 Sundays ago when I was going through Daniel 9, that after the service ended, I realized I'd overlooked it. And I'm not looking at my outline. I'm trying to memorize it and do it from within. And it occurred to me that that wasn't the reason I forgot that section, because I've done that when I've been looking at the outline. My eyes just jump down and I overlook a whole section. But I was back up there in verse 17, where Daniel was praying for the temple, which was now in ruin, which was desolate. It just wasn't even there. And he prays for God's favor, which of course would imply the restoration of that building. And he said in verse 17 of Daniel 9, "Now therefore, O our God, hear the prayer of thy servant and his supplications, and cause thy face to shine," which means to look with favor, "upon thy sanctuary that is desolate," the temple that had been decimated and destroyed, "for the Lord's sake." And you remember the curious twist? He's talking to God, but he didn't say for thy sake. He said for the Lord's sake. And you remember how we pointed out that he's praying for the temple for the sake of Jesus Christ? Do you remember that? And because of the interest that Jesus Christ had in that temple, and that was the point I didn't expound, and I want to go back and grab that. Jesus Christ, the coming Messiah, had a definite, vested interest in the reconstruction and restoration of that temple. Number one, because it was prophesied he would go there, and he would appear there. We see this in Haggai chapter 2. In Haggai chapter 2. And when the temple was being rebuilt, there was a delay for a period of time. And then Haggai comes on the scene and tells the people to get back with it and bring that thing to completion. That's what Haggai is all about. And he says in verse 6 of chapter 2, "For thus saith the Lord of hosts, yet once it is a little while, and I will shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land, and I will shake all nations, and the desire of all nations shall come." And that's the Lord Jesus Christ. And did you know that even the other nations, the heathen nations, looked for some notable personage to come in the future? I forget, I think it was Socrates that even spoke of the coming of a Messiah. I believe it was he. The desire of all nations. I mean, look, wise men from the east, these weren't Jews, came to worship Christ at his birth and to bring him gifts. There was an expectation. And so the desire of all nations shall come, and I will fill this house with glory, the rebuilt temple, saith the Lord of hosts. The silver is mine and the gold is mine, saith the Lord of hosts. And the glory of this latter house shall be greater than the former. That is the temple built by Solomon that had been destroyed in the Babylonian invasion. Saith the Lord of hosts, and in this place will I give peace, saith the Lord of hosts. And when the Lord Jesus Christ came to that temple, that was the coming of the desire of all nations, and it was in that temple that Christ gave peace, and I'll show you what I mean in a minute. And then you come over to this prophecy in Malachi chapter 3. Malachi chapter 3 and verse 1. "Behold, I will send my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me, and the Lord whom ye seek shall suddenly come to his temple, even the messenger of the covenant, whom ye delight in. Behold, he shall come, saith the Lord of hosts." So Christ had an interest in that temple being rebuilt because it would be there that he would fulfill prophecy, which proves him to be the Lord's Christ. Had that temple not been fulfilled, prophecy not built, prophecy would not have been fulfilled, and we would have lacked that evidence that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. Furthermore, coming to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2, it was at this temple that he was brought when he was a baby to be dedicated according to the law of Moses. As we read in Luke chapter 2 and verse 22. "And when the days of her purification according to the law of Moses were accomplished, they brought him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every male that openeth the womb shall be called holy to the Lord. And to offer a sacrifice according to that which is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or of 2 young pigeons." There were whole chunks of Moses' law that required the Jews to go to the temple, to perform certain rites, to assemble there, on certain feast days, And remember what the Son of God said? He said, I didn't come to break the law, but fulfill it. Had that temple not been restored, he would not have been able to fulfill the law of Moses, which qualified him and certified him to indeed be God's Christ. Furthermore, you remember it was at the age of 12. The only account we have of the youth of Christ beyond his birth time and babyhood. Excuse me, I don't know what's wrong. So he goes to the temple, and it's at 12 years old. We read in Luke 2:42 that they go up, he's 12 years old, to Jerusalem after the custom of the feast. They were going there to celebrate the Passover in fulfillment of Moses' law, requiring them to appear in Jerusalem at the temple at this time of the year. And you remember when they returned home, they couldn't find him. They thought he was with this friend, their acquaintance or kinfolk, and they couldn't find him, and they went back. And where did they find him? In this very temple that was rebuilt. There, with the doctors of the law, hearing them and asking questions. And when they interrogated, why did you do this? We've sought thee sorrowing. And he said in verse 49 those tremendous words, how is it that you sought me? Wished you not that I must be about my Father's business? I want you to notice that he put the Father's business above the emotions of his own parents, of his own family, of his own mother. The Father's business came ahead of family feelings. And if we are like our Lord, that will be the way it is with us. Father's business first, how family feels about it. Second, mother can sorrow ever so much. I must be about my Father's business. And what was that Father's business? Dealing with, trading in, talking about, discoursing the Word of God. But also, it was in this temple, if you'll flip over to Luke, verse 53, in which Christ daily taught the Jews. This was a teaching forum for Jesus. We read in Luke 22:53, when he was interrogated, he said, when I was daily, Luke 22:53, when I was daily with you in the temple. And what was he doing there? Well, John 19 tells us, keep your finger there, John 18:20 tells us, he said, I spake openly to the world and never taught in the synagogue and in the temple, whither the Jews always resort. So he was there teaching in that temple. You stretch forth no hands against me, but this is your hour and the power of your darkness, and the power of darkness. Don't you see his interest in the temple? It was his pulpit, whither the Jews resorted, so that he could teach them, so that they would be without excuse. And lastly, in Luke chapter 23, Christ is hanging on the cross, and we read in Luke 23, verse 45, and the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was rent in the midst. It was the veil of that reconstructed temple that was rent in the midst when the Savior died, thus showing that the barrier that had been between man and God had been removed in the death of the Son of God, and the way of the holiest had been made manifest, so that sin no longer stands between us and our God. The veil is broken through the death of the flesh of Christ, symbolized by the ripping of the veil from top to bottom by the very hand of God, so that man now is reconciled and at peace with God and can come directly to the holiest of all. In this place he gave peace.
Amen.
See that? And thus fulfill the prophecy. So this morning, thousands of years removed from the existence of that temple, may we pause and give thanks to God that that temple was rebuilt for the Lord's sake. And the word of God was fulfilled, redemption was accomplished, and peace was made in that place. Blessed be God the Father for the temple and its reconstruction, and for the answer to Daniel's prayer. So now we come to the last request, and that'll be in verse 19. Daniel has been making his petition to the Father. And now we come down to his last request, and then we start in verse 20, a new section. And this is the answer of God to Daniel's prayer. This is the last request. And it's interesting the way it's worded. Excuse me. And so it is. O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, hearken and do. Defer not. For thine own sake, O my God, and for thy city and for the people are called, for thy city and thy people are called by thy name. Now I want you to look at what Daniel asks the Lord to do. Look at that. It's very interesting. He asks him to hear, hearken, forgive, do, and defer not. And that's it. He does not specifically ask God to turn their captivity. He does not specifically ask God to restore the people and restore the temple. He just says, hear, hearken, forgive, do, and defer not. Very interesting that he would put it that way. Now, he did make some specific requests in this prayer. The specific request to God to turn away his anger, to forgive, and to shine, cause his face to shine upon his sanctuary, to be favorable to his sanctuary and to his people. Those are the specific requests. But now, as far as the actual turning of the captivity, as far as the actual rebuilding of the temple, he doesn't say that in so many words. What he does is he says, Lord, do. And he leaves it with God as to what to do, with this confidence that if the Lord would do according to his mercies, all would be well for the people and for the city and for the sanctuary. Lord, you just do whatever it is you think needs to be done. And if you'll just be merciful and forgive and show favor, it'll all go well. I think that's pretty good. I think we'd all do well to learn how to pray like that. And so that's his request, is that the Lord will just simply hearken and do and defer not. And then he says to the Lord to do something and defer not. Now the word defer means to put off an action or a procedure to some other time. It means to delay or to postpone. So what he's saying to the Lord is do something and do it now. Do it quickly and don't put it off. He's asking God to act quickly to their relief. And he had a good reason to ask that and expect that it would be thus. Because remember what gave rise to the prayer in chapter 2. He'd been doing his Bible study, and he'd read in the book of Jeremiah that their captivity would last 70 years, and after that they would be restored. So we had a biblical basis to expect the captivity to soon be over, and the city to be restored and the temple to be rebuilt. So he had a firm biblical basis for asking God to act and act swiftly. But even though we don't have a book that says, okay, 70 years for your trouble and then it's over, we do have there a precedent that when we come to God in our desperation, that we can ask the Lord to hurry up. I'll give you another one to show you you got a biblical basis to say, dear God, defer not. Help and hurry up. And he will. Amen. And he will. When you come to Psalm chapter 70, and I'll show you that momentarily, that hurried up help in the form in which it comes, and a beautiful form it is. Stay tuned. So we come to Psalm chapter 70 for a precedent, and here the psalmist David says in verse 5, but I am poor and needy. See, he's in desperate straits. Make haste unto me, which is just another way of saying defer not. Don't put it off. Make haste unto me, O God. Thou art my help and my deliverer. O Lord, make no tarrying, which is just another way of saying get with it, hurry up, don't wait, don't defer, don't postpone, don't delay. So we have that precedent. And so we come back to Daniel 9, Daniel 9:19. And this is the last of the requests. Now, Daniel could have kept praying, but the Lord appeared to give the answer before he got to the end of the prayer. And that comes up in the next point. And so he says, O Lord, forgive, O Lord, hearken and do and defer not. Now why? Why, Lord, is he asking God to do this? Why is he asking him to act and act swiftly? He said, for thine own name's sake, O my God, for thy city and thy people are called by thy name. If you have paid attention and followed my teaching on this prayer, one thing that should have emerged to your understanding very clearly is the fact that Daniel's main concern in this prayer was the honor of his God. To do this for thy name's sake, because of your interest in this thing, for the honor of thy name, first and foremost. And did not our Lord Jesus Christ, when He taught us how to pray, tell us to put that uppermost? You taught that, James, when you taught on the model prayer of Matthew 6. When He says, Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. That's to be our foremost concern, is the honor and glory of God's name. Now the point that I want to make out of that, of personal application, is we would all be much better Christians if the honor of God was our foremost concern above everything else. Far and away more important than our own personal honor, the honor of God foremost in the foreground. And so I want to close my comments on this with a question, a searching question. Whenever you sin, and sin you do, as do we all, what, in your opinion, is the greatest damage done? Is it maybe the damage to your health? Is it maybe the damage to your income? Is it the damage to your family? The damage to your reputation? Or the damage you've done to the honor of God because you bear His name? That'll tell a lot about you. That's the most horrific aspect of any crime we commit, is the shame and reproach we brought upon the lovely name we bear. Now let that thought sit with you for a moment, and we come to the next verse. Daniel's been praying, and we read in verse 20. Now we come to the answer to the prayer, and an interesting answer we're going to find it to be. And whilst I was speaking, whilst, all means the same thing. And whilst I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God for the holy mountain of my God. Yea, whilst I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, that's referenced in chapter 8, being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation. Oh, there's so much to ladle out of that. We may get to the 70 weeks by next year. There is so much to ladle out of that. I've been in Elijah's chariot this week, and I won't get to it today. I shan't get there. But that whole thing about the evening oblation, it will just send you in orbit if you are as I. So anyway, so Daniel says, well, I'm speaking. Whilst I was speaking, the angel Gabriel appears to him. Daniel hadn't even finished his prayer. He was still in the process of praying, and Gabriel appears and begins to speak to him and to give him his answer. But the thing that we want to zero in on here is that Daniel at this point sums up what his prayer consisted of. It was two main things it consisted of. Number one, confessing his sin and the sin of the people. And number two, presenting his supplication. That's his request, the things he begged God for, presenting that before the Lord. Confessing sin and supplication. Now there's a lesson for all of us in our prayer life. And that is, when you're praying to God, first, confess your sins. Secondly, present your supplications. Take care of the sin issue first, then the supplication. And here's the reason. Because if you don't deal with the sin, the supplication won't be heard. And I'll give you one verse, and we could give you more, but I'll give you one verse that will nicely stitch this up for you, and that's in Psalm 66 and verse 18. If I regard iniquity in my heart, I'm still holding it in there, making excuses for it, regarding it, giving it some kind of place of reason to be there, raison d'être, reason to be there, justification, holding it dear, not wanting to part with it. If I regard iniquity in my heart, the Lord will not hear me. So you got to come clean with it first. Confess the sin, deal with the sin issue, then you're ready to bring your supplications and present them to the Lord. Take care of the sin issue. But then the next point that I want to make from this is to remind you again of something we saw in the very beginning when Daniel started his prayer. When he spoke in the first person plural as he began his confession of sin. when he said, we have sinned. We, us. And so Daniel breaks that down for us, and he says, I was confessing my sin and the sin of my people. Now the lesson to be gleaned from that is this. And we do confess the sins of our brethren. You can better bet I've confessed to God the sins of this church. And I have sought from God forgiveness for the sins of this congregation and for others in this congregation. But number one, you want to make sure you confess your own, acknowledge your own, and deal with your own. And this is exactly the thing our Savior warned us against when he says, judge not that you be not judged. You want to make very, very sure that when you're judging someone else's behavior, even to the point of concluding that they are sinning and you need to ask God to forgive them, you want to make sure you judged your own first and pointed the finger at yourself first and judged yourself first and confessed your sin first. Because if you judge others for something you're doing yourself, you're going to meet with severe judgment, and you are playing the part of an hypocrite. Now, having made that point, there is a rabbit in the bush I want to chase. I want to say something to you. I want to assure you of something regarding myself in this connection. I know lately I've been taking a lot of hits at this modern digital technology and what it's doing to us. Part of the reason for that is I've been reading a good bit about it. Joe Mashing gave me a book. I've told you about it, The Digital Invasion. Absolutely stunning, revealing what this stuff is doing to us. And I just recently ordered a couple of DVDs. It's the same DVD, it was 2 for 1, called Captivated. Sandy Laba has the same. She got the same deal, called Captivated. And it's talking about the addictive nature of this modern digital media and how it has taken our culture captive. People are in bondage to it. And the worst part of it, they don't even realize it. That's always the worst bondage, is the one you're in and you don't even know it. And I'll give you an example of that. The Jews of Christ's day in John 8. They said, we be never in bondage to any man. And they hadn't been a free nation in hundreds of years. Since Babylon invaded, they had never been an independent state since then, and even then they were under the Roman thumb and under obligation to pay tribute to Caesar as their superior. They were in bondage and didn't even know it. And I think that's what's happening today. And it's like I said in that email this week. I know I talk a lot about it because I am absolutely convinced I am speaking against the modern day Baal, an electronic and a digital god. And just as the prophets said again and again and again, so shall I. And if you weary of it, you better watch out. You're in trouble. This video that I was watching about the DVD, about the Captivated. And I think one of the problems we're facing, and I know it's so of me, is this stuff has come upon us so quickly. The changes have been so fast. And we jump on the bandwagon and don't even realize how under the control of it we are, until then we read a book like that and we think, oh my God, I wasn't even aware of how far this had gone. But the thing that I want to assure you of is that as I warn you and point the finger at you, I am pointing the finger at me. I am spending a good bit of time reevaluating myself and my relationship to this, and my usage of this, and the degree to which this has changed my life and is wielding control of my life. I'm like many of you in your jobs, where your whole work revolves around the PC. I've let that happen to me. If you take my PC away, and you've cut my hands off. I've really got to go at it a different way. I can manage it. But it is amazing. It is amazing how far this has gone. And it has set me to rethinking a lot of things in my own life. And recently I sat down and I journaled. And I just journaled with myself about this whole thing and my relationship to it, and some of the changes that I want to make in my own life to make sure that I have boundaries in place and I have this under control. And recently, Matt Ruma and I had breakfast together, and we had a very in-depth and profitable and edifying discussion on this issue, I thought. And I shared with Matt what I had journaled about this. But in this captivated thing it was talking about, and the whole nature of the email and the texting and the surfing, and one of the things they really zeroed in on are these computer games. You know, you've got the Xbox, and you've got all these games, and this is true of all of the computer games, not just the ones that deal with crime, like auto theft, where you're playing the part of a criminal. No Christian has any business doing that. And the violent stuff that's in these things, and they purposefully make this stuff, knowing the addictive nature of the adrenaline rush you get when you play it. They purposefully make it so that you'll get hooked on it, and many young people do. The problem was so bad in Korea, in the arcades where they were playing these games, that there was one kid that died. He didn't eat, he didn't drink, he played till he keeled over dead. And Korea, one of the main manufacturers of this stuff, is addressing this issue and realizing how problematic it is. But this was one interesting thing, and again, I've been reading about this, I've been studying this stuff, I'm full of this matter, you're going to hear about it. With my grandkids, I have the iPad, and I have a couple of games on there, and they're the more innocent games. But I'll tell you what, there are time limits put on that. I'll say you have only so much, and that's it, and I take it away. Because I watch them when they're playing that, and you look at their eyes, and they are captivated. And I make sure that restrictions are put on this. But what they pointed out about these computer games, they've done research on the brain. They know so much more about the brain than they used to in the past. It's amazing the things they figured out. And they said, whenever you're, for example, engaged in productive activity, maybe you're redecorating a room, or you're building a chest, or a bookshelf, or you're writing a composition, or it could be anything, painting a picture, or composing a piece of music, or learning a piece of music. As you are engaged in this process of productive activity, you get into it. And you start to enjoy it, and the pleasure centers of the brain start to fire off. Because you get into it, and you enjoy it, and you all know what it's like when you get the job done. The sense of pleasure you feel from having produced something. Have you ever redecorated a room and noticed that you just look at it over and over and over again, and just bask in the enjoyment of the newly redecorated room? Well, that's what we're talking about. Well, when these kids play these computer games, or adults for that matter, play these computer games, and again, this happens even with the ones that aren't violent. There's one, there was a lady they interviewed, there's one game where you plant a garden, and then you harvest the garden. I don't know what it's called. This woman said she spent hours and hours and hours a day. She was totally addicted. And she finally had to break away from it entirely, and she started doing real gardening instead of virtual gardening. Don't you see what's happening? People are leaving the real world to live in the virtual world. This is the problem with this stuff. But they pointed out that when they play these games, the same mechanisms invoked in genuine, real productive activity, brain mechanisms or parts, get fired up when they play these games. So that when they get done with the game, they have this same sense of having produced something as they would have gotten in the real world. The only problem is they haven't produced a cotton-picking thing, but they feel like they have. And that this can interfere with genuine productivity. It's a substitute. It's an escape into a virtual world away from the real world. And furthermore, this was so interesting. They pointed out, and I wouldn't know, thank God, because I've never had experience, but they say this is exactly the same mechanism that kicks in when people take crack cocaine. That they feel productive, and they haven't produced a thing. They've simply had a drug high. And this stuff is so addicting. Here's the point. When you give your kids unlimited, unsupervised access to a PC, or you give them a personal PC or laptop, or you give them an iPad or an iPod or a cell phone with internet access, or even, it doesn't even have to be that, it can just be Xbox, and you allow them unrestricted, uncontrolled, unsupervised usage of that, what you don't realize is you have just given that kid a drug, an addicting drug. And for all the difference it makes, you might as well give them marijuana to smoke or cocaine to take. It's addicting. They were talking about this social networking. They're doing studies and finding that the addiction to social networking is more difficult to break than the addiction to tobacco and to alcohol. It's that severe. Now, this is alarming stuff, people. You may think I'm alarmist. You better bet I am. And you parents that aren't supervising and putting boundaries, and it can be in other things. And what they pointed out, this didn't start with the digital invasion. This started all the way back with the telegraph. Do you realize that when the telegraph and the Morse code came in, people were putting risque stuff, telegraphing risque stuff on these things? That they were building romantic relationships with people just like they're doing today with the social networking. They were doing that with the telegraph, with the Morse code. They had wireless telegraph. And this is really something. On the Titanic, and they had a fellow there that would transmit messages, and these people had all these personal messages, these funsy things that they wanted telegraphed, and he had a whole stack of them that he was telegraphing from the Titanic. And then a telegraph came through from another ship that they were entering into an area where there were icebergs. That guy took that message, put it under the stack, and continued to do the personal telegraphing and did not heed the message in time enough. And the Titanic is lying at the bottom of the ocean for the same reason a lot of you text compulsively. Now, do I have reason to be alarmed? It went from there to the telephone. It went from there to the television, to the movie screen, to where now people are taking televisions in their pockets with them everywhere they go. And this is where we are. And it is alarming. And it is addicting. And you can come up with every kind of justification in the world. You can even color it with religion. People do that. But it doesn't change the difference of the nature of it. And so I warn. But I want to say to you that I introspect. Years ago, when my kids were growing up, my kids did not grow up with television. We didn't have a television. I remember the day I took the little television I'd bought at Woolco out into my yard, put it in the garbage can, took a hammer and smashed the screen, and we never had one. I have one now, but we don't really look at it much. Oh, very, very little. We just use it more as a screen for DVDs and videos. So my kids did not grow up with that. And Friday night used to be game night and family night. We'd do skits and all kind of funsy things like that. And then after a while, I bought a video player. It wasn't a TV. All you could do was stick VCRs in there and play them. And it was controlled. We did not allow our children unlimited access. If they wanted to look at something, they had to ask us. We maintained controls of it. I mean, we were far, far and away, way less than most families with this kind of thing. I remember one time, Caroline wanted to watch a Lucy, and she asked her mother, and then started to put it in. And I said, no. She said, Mom said. You know how kids like to do that. And so that's become a standing joke in our family. Mom said. But we maintained control. But I will tell you something. Friday night changed. And instead of playing board games, we watched a movie. Yeah. Now, mind you, we did it together as a family. We were still together as a family. But I look back on that now and wish that we had maybe had 2 nights games, 2 nights. I regret that. Yeah. I regret that. I really, really do. So I'm wanting to let you know that I shine the light on me as well as on you. But I want to brag on somebody for a moment. And I want this to be a lesson to all of you. And listen, this virtual world thing, I mean, people will run from real life. They will run from their depression. They will seek refuge in social networking, internet surfing, computer games, and movies. Or some people find it in novels and books and spend hours and hours and hours burying themselves in another world to escape the real one. Now, let me say something. I don't want to cast a snare. We all do that. There's nothing wrong with sometimes having a diversion, where you step aside and you go into another world, as it were. You read a book about a family or a story, and you get wrapped up in that, or watching a movie. There's nothing wrong with that if you control it and it doesn't control you. But when it becomes a substitute for God as the remedy for your problem, there's idolatry. And there's where you've got a problem, and you need to address it. when it's hours and hours and hours, and you lose all track of time and so out of touch with reality. And that's what happens to these people, even to the point of a young man keeling over dead in an arcade. You got a problem. This little guy here, Zach Ruma, was given an iPod. No internet access, but he could play games on it. This young man, I'm not going to call him a boy, this is a young man, took his iPod, gave it to his dad, and said, get rid of it. I can't control it.
Amen.
Now that's a man.
Amen.
Remember what I taught you about courage? That one of the most courageous things you will do is face your weakness and your vulnerabilities. And he did. I am so proud of this young man, and you are blessed to have a boy like this, let me tell you. And you've done a good job. I'll give you credit. You have plugged free times. You took all the screens and took the whole family off of them for a month. I like courage like that. I like, where are the men? That's what I want to know. Where are the men? To step up and take control in their homes and say, enough's enough, and put boundaries and draw lines. You say, but my wife will raise a fit. Are you a man?
Amen.
The kids will raise a fit. Are you a man? Who's the head of the house? Son, if you ever obey the gospel and become part of this, and you keep that mindset for the rest of your life, you'll be a prince in Israel.
Amen.
I commend that young man for that. We've got adults in this church that don't have that kind of self-discipline and the willingness to face themselves and when to draw the line and say, enough. Now, that was the fat rabbit in the bush that went from this, confessing my sin and the sin of my people. And I just want you to know, when I warn, I look at me. And I deal with me. And I've done that, and I'm continuing to do that. And I always want to do that. I always want to keep the brakes on. Let me tell you this little bit, and then I'll move on from that. It's not that I dislike all of it, because I don't. I have my iPad, and there's things I can do with it that I like. For example, this week we FaceTimed. My cousin and I have been communicating, and we FaceTime, and we're reconnecting after so many years. I grew up with this boy. His brother was my age. He was 4 years younger. We used to spend the night at each other's houses, spend a week at their lake place, and building a treasure of many wonderful memories. And so we've kind of reconnected, and we've set it up so that my mother and my Aunt June, the sister that's a year older than she, could see each other on FaceTime. And it was great. It was really nice. Mother loved it. Aunt June was ecstatic. And I like that. But you know what? Even though I like it, and there's a part of me that gets excited about it, I don't just say, oh, this is wonderful. Oh, this is amazing. Oh, isn't this neat? I don't go there. The whole time that I use and I enjoy, there's a break. There's something in me. You know what that something is? There's a Bible term for it. It's called circumspection. You always want to be careful. And I always, remember, I tell you people, think outside the screen. And I always say to myself, okay, what would we have done in the absence of FaceTime? What did people do before that? They dealt with life as it was with the help of God, and they did just fine. That's the answer. We don't want to ever get so caught up. I told my grandson Brendan this week, he loves sports, and that's fine. But I said, Brendan, learn this lesson. The devil will set the traps in the things you enjoy and love the most. You love these computer games, you love your emailing, you love your FaceTiming, you love your Facebook. That's where the trap will be. And if you don't watch for it, you're going to be a fool. And I guarantee you, the next news you know, you're hooked. And these addictions, the addictions to social networking, to internet porn, are extremely difficult to break. Extremely. All right, now that said, the next thing I want you to notice in this prayer as we move along, Daniel says while I was speaking and praying, he said, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God, for the holy mountain of my God. And the next thing I want to focus in on is that expression, the Lord my God. For the holy mountain of my God. Daniel appeals to God in this prayer, and this is important, on the basis of a personal relationship with God. as his God. Now this thing of having God for one's own God, to be able to say, my God, my Lord, is an article of God's covenant with his elect people. Now I'll take you first of all to Genesis chapter 17. It's an article of God's covenant with his chosen people. In Genesis 17, in God's covenant with Abraham, he says, in Genesis 17:7, I will establish my covenant between me and thee, and thy seed after thee in their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto thee. So that Abraham could say, my God, to be a God unto thee and to thy seed after thee. This is an article of the covenant with God's elect. God didn't make that covenant with everybody. He made that covenant with Abraham and his seed. Then we come to Hebrews chapter 8, verse 10. Again, notice, this covenant's not made with everybody, but with God's people, chosen people. And we read in Hebrews 8 and verse 10, for this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, saith the Lord. I will put my laws into their mind and write them in their hearts, and I will be to them a God, and they shall be to me a people. So that they can say to God, my God, our God, in a very special way that other nations cannot. This particular relationship that God sustains with his people as being their God, so that they can call him my God, our God, is a relationship that God sustains only with his elect people and not with all mankind in general. This may be observed in the following three passages, in Deuteronomy chapter 7 and verse 6. In Deuteronomy 7, verse 6. He said, for thou art an holy people unto the Lord thy God. The Lord thy God hath chosen thee to be a, watch it, hold your seats, to be a special people unto himself above all people that are upon the face of the earth. They were his people. He was their God in a way that he was to no other in the earth. And then come over to Psalm 33. This gets really good, or at least to me. And then you decide for yourself whether you think it's good for you. In Psalm 33 and verse 12, blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, and the people whom he hath chosen for his own inheritance. You see, they have this special relationship so that with God, so that he is their God, over and above and in a way different than all other nations. And then we come to 1 Peter, where we make application to ourselves as believers in the New Testament, that we have this same relationship to him as our God. And we read in verses 9 and 10, but ye are a chosen generation. Remember, this is a relationship peculiar to God's elect. If you're one of God's elect children this morning, God is your God in a way he is to no other. Your God personally. So we read in verse 9, but ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, and holy nation, a peculiar people. 1 Peter, did I say second? Chapter 2, I'm sorry. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9. But ye are a chosen generation, thank you, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people. See, God's private property. That's what it is, something peculiar, something private and specific to you, especially to you. That ye should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, which in time past were not a people, but are now the people of God. See, everybody don't have this relationship with God as his people and he their God. And they didn't in the past, but now they do. Which in time past were not a people, but are now the people of God, which had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. If you have this relationship with God, so that he's your God and you're his people, that's because you've obtained mercy. But notice that obtaining of mercy is founded in God's election, in which God says, I will have mercy upon whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion upon whom I will have compassion. So that it is not of him that willeth, nor of him that runneth, but of God that showeth mercy. It's all founded in election. Now, because Daniel had this kind of relationship, Daniel could say the same thing David did, who had the same relationship when David said in Psalm 16. In Psalm 16 and verse 5. Psalm 16:5. The Lord is is the portion of mine inheritance and my cup. Thou maintainest my lot. You know what he's saying there? He says, my inheritance, the thing I've got coming to me, my cup, what's mine, what belongs to me, what I inherit is God himself. That's what he's saying. The Lord is my God. I mean, for example, that little redhead sitting there, that's my wife. That's my woman. She belongs to me. She belongs to me in a way she belongs to no other person and to no other man. And I belong to her. And that is the reason we read something like this. In 1 Corinthians 7:4, the wife hath not power of her own body, but the husband. And likewise also the husband hath not power of his own body, but the wife. Defraud ye not one another, except it be with consent for a time. She's mine. And I have the power and authority to use her for my pleasure. And she has exactly that same power and authority to use me for hers. Because we belong to each other. And we have that power and authority being each other's property. And it's a mutual thing. Each. It's not just one-sided. It's mutual. And for it to function as it ought, that mutual recognition needs to be there, and it works itself out in the relationship. But the beautiful thing is that woman there, all that she is, as a Christian, as an artist, as a homemaker, as a cook, is mine. I am so privileged. I got a prize. Now you just take that limited analogy there and transfer it over and think about this for a moment. And I'm going to tell you to imagine this, but really, this isn't imagination. This is the way it is. Imagine a being that is infinite. Infinite in power. Infinite in duration. Infinite in knowledge. Infinite in presence. Infinite in goodness. And infinite in holiness. And imagine being able to call a being like that your very own, my God. And to have that infinite being engaged for you and not against you. Oh, you're sitting pretty. Yes. We don't even realize how blessed we are to have that. A being like that for our very own. And because we can call God ours, turn to Psalm 23, and if you don't know where that is, you are beyond hope. Two things every Christian should know, Psalm 23 and Amazing Grace. And the Lord's Prayer. But I'll bet you there's multitudes of them don't know where the Lord's Prayer is. You'd ask, where do you find that in the Bible? They wouldn't have a clue. Gospel of Matthew, what's that? The Lord is, watch this, personal possessive pronoun, is my shepherd, belongs to me. He's mine. I shall not want. Because of this personal possession of God, the fact that He is ours, we have infinite resources at our disposal, and therefore shall never genuinely ever be in want. Now, having God for your possession doesn't mean you won't ever have trouble. If you read the Psalm 23, you'll see the guy had his problems. I mean, he says there in verse 3, He restoreth my soul, which means there were times when he got out of the way and needed to be brought back. He needed healing and restoration. He talks about walking through the valley of the shadow of death. You'll not be exempt from that. He talks about a table prepared in the presence of his enemies. You'll have those for sure. What this tells us when God is ours, it tells us, it doesn't say we won't have our trouble, but it does tell us this, we will never be left alone in them. We will never be alone. And it is succinctly expressed right there when he says, Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Why is he with you? Because he's yours to take with you everywhere you go. And because God is ours, our possession, is mine. I am my beloved's. My beloved is mine, said the writer of Canticles. In Hebrews 13, that's the Song of Solomon, by the way. In Hebrews 13, because I have this relationship, the same relationship that Daniel had and gave voice to when he said, "Oh Lord, my God, my God." We've seen it 3 times today in the verses that we have examined. Because we have that, we know this in verses 5 and 6 of Hebrews 13. "Let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as ye have. For he hath said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee, so that we may boldly say, the Lord is," watch it, here's that pronoun, "my helper." He's mine. Mine. Imagine having infinite power for your helper. Imagine that. So that there's nothing life hands to you you can't handle with a helper like that. My helper, and I will not fear what man shall do unto me. Because of this relationship of having God as our God, my God. And because of this fact that he is with me and I have these infinite resources at my disposal, there are 2 things that flow out of that. I can learn contentment and I can live free of fear. I can be content with whatever life hands me because I am never without what is the best, and that is the Lord. And I can know no fear. What's to fear when you've got omnipotence with you? What's to fear when you've got with you the one that knows what's ahead every step you take, of good or of evil, and's got it all fixed of what he's going to do for you and with you and by you whenever you walk through that valley or take that next step or turn that next corner? What is there to fear with a relationship with a being like that? So much of our fear and so much anxiety really truly arises from the fact that we are insecure in our relationship with God and recognizing what we have. And when you have God for your God with you always, look, you can cancel your Facebook account and not be devastated. The computer can fire off and you'll manage just fine. You can lose your house, you'll make it. Amen. You can lose your life, you're going to make it because he's given you eternal life. You can walk out of a toxic or unhealthy relationship and not feel like your whole life is lost and you have nothing to live for. No Christian that understands his relationship with God can ever make such an asinine, foolish, stupid statement like that. That is nothing more than the uttering and murmuring of unbelief. You can lose your child and make it. Yes. Not that you want to. It's a horrifying thing, and I don't envy anyone that walks that path. But you can make it. People do. You could live without ever seeing your sister again on FaceTime when you have this. You see. You see. I have the Lord. And you just remember this. Anytime you're ever able to do something with technology and you think, oh, if I hadn't had that cell phone, if I hadn't had email, oh my God, what would we have done? Or what would the cause of Christ do? This person was reached. This person was ministered to because I had a PC. You just don't forget what I told you. God doesn't need this stuff to do his work. The devil does. We have infinite resources because we have God. We don't have to have the digital God. A man standing out in a wilderness clothed with camel's hair and a leathern girdle ushered a cry that has traversed the globe before anybody ever knew the internet could ever be. Just understand that. Why? Because he had the Lord, his God, and the Spirit of God to propel the message. This is so important. But let me make this next point, and then I shall be done. As Daniel comes to his prayer, and I told one person, I said, you'll be glad you came. And this is what I was referring to, so though maybe I have already said something that made this person glad they're here. But in Daniel 9, Daniel says while he was praying, then even while he was praying, and he repeats it again in verse 21, yea, whilst I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation and informed me. He says, yea, whilst I was speaking, yea, he's affirming that Gabriel appeared to him even while he was saying his prayer. He hadn't even done yet, wasn't even done yet, hadn't finished it. And the answer was already on the way. The answer was there. There was Gabriel. But he says yea, and he says he repeats it. Now that word yea is a word that is used to express affirmation or assent. It's just like he's affirming that, yeah, this happened. 2 times he says it. And when something is repeated in the Bible, very often it's for the same reason that we repeat things to people. Why do we repeat things to people? Either because we forgot we said it, or we repeat it why? So they'll get it, for emphasis. So if he repeated that point, there's something there he wants you to get, and it's this. That before Daniel was done praying, the answer was on the way. And this fulfills an ancient prophecy, or accords with an ancient prophecy over here in Isaiah 65. Of course, in Daniel's time it wasn't so ancient, but it is in ours. Where we read over here in Isaiah 65 and verse 24. And it shall come to pass that before they call, I will answer. You see, a God of infinite knowledge knows in advance that you're going to pray that prayer, and he knows exactly what you're going to say. Now, you still need to pray the prayer. Don't take that as thinking, well, I don't need to pray. Because remember, he knows in advance what you're going to pray. And if you don't pray, he's going to know also in advance you didn't do it. So, I suggest you do it. But he says, and it shall come to pass that before they call, I will answer. And while they're yet speaking, I will hear. And that's exactly what happened to Daniel. While he was praying, the Lord was already sending the answer on the way. And the comfort that that should bring to all of us, and if you are as I, prayer is one of your biggest struggles. It is for me. It was for Paul. He said, strive together in prayer with me. That means struggle. You got to fight the devil and opposition and a wandering mind. And you know, what I experience in German sometimes when I'm having to fetch the language and I'm just racking my brain to fetch the words and the grammatical expressions to put it together. We often do when we pray, don't we? And then sometimes we just lose track of what we're saying and we say something stupid. I mean, I've gotten word on the phone that somebody died, and I got down and prayed for them and realized, wait a minute, it's too late. I was so used to praying for them. I was praying for them after. They'd say, oh, Lord, have mercy on them. Well, it's done now. Say, Lord, strike that. It was just now, surely none of you have ever made a mistake like that, but I have. I strike that one. That was a faux pas, if ever there was one. But we do that. We just sometimes struggle to find our words. But here's the beautiful thing, is that when you're praying, even though you don't say everything that needs to be said or could be said, and you don't get it all out, you're praying to a God that can read and knows your needs and the desires of your heart. Amen. And the answer's on the way. Amen. Before you get the words out, or even if you don't get them out, because God can see you try. This is, just if I could use an analogy in my relationship with Manfred and Helga, we're close enough and we've got the linguistic connection enough that I'll start into a sentence and then I'll stumble for a word and to try to bring my thought to completion. And if they'll just stay quiet, I'll get there. But they know where I'm going, and so they just give me the word. But it's just nice. Again, they're a living dictionary. But they'll see that, and they'll just finish my sentence. And I like to think that God does that for us so many times. He finishes the sentence. He's got all the words we need, and he helps us along like they help me in learning my language. And I'm thankful for that. I'll tell you a funny thing that happens, though, is that sometimes I'll have an idea or I'll think of something, and I can't call up the German word for it. So if I'm going to look it up in a dictionary, I need to think of the English word. And I can't think of the English word. And so I see the object or whatever it is, and I'm so in the mode of thinking in German that I'll say, Ich habe das englische Wort vergessen. I forgot the English word. Now let me find that one first, and then maybe I can find what I'm looking for. Has that ever happened to you when you get in the mode of speaking another language? The English word will be gone for a moment. You just have a blank. I've had that. I'm sure you've had that when you were learning English. You know what I'm talking about, Edgar. You came here not even knowing English.
You know, the exhausting experience and what a relief it would be to flip back to Spanish. And it's work. So anyway, God's the same. He sees where we're going, and the answer's on the way. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to get what you ask for right away.
That's right.
You know, Daniel asked God to favor the sanctuary, and it was years before that thing was brought to completion. I don't know that Daniel ever even lived to see the completion. It doesn't mean you're going to get what you ask for right away, but I tell you what you will get. You will get an answer of peace. And you know what Daniel got? He got information. And you know what that information was? It was one of the most lucid, marvelous prophecies of the coming of the Messiah and what he would accomplish in his death on the cross for the salvation of sinners. And sometime when you bring God your grief and you ask him to hurry up and help, sometimes that hurried answer is this. You come to church and you hear about Jesus. Amen. And you hear of the gospel and the grace of God. And you learn more about Christ. And when you learn of Christ and you learn of his glory, it takes whatever you go through and it puts it into perspective and makes it far more bearable. Amen. Until God does something else in his due time. And so that's our sermon today, and I hope you got a blessing, and we leave it there. May God add his blessing to his word. Thank you for your kind and patient attention, and may God forgive anything that may have been uttered amiss and wash the message of whatever Ben Mott tarnished it.